Imagine for a second a world where the stock market, international diplomacy, and, well, even the weather aren't driven by random chaos or complex geopolitical strategy.
Right.
Imagine instead that all of these things, like the sudden dip in the price of gold, a delayed presidential flight, a thunderstorm over your city, are actually governed by this giant, mathematically predictable cosmic spreadsheet.
A cosmic spreadsheet. I like that.
Yeah, like you just look at row 12, column C, and it tells you exactly why your boss is angry today or, why a specific foreign policy deal just fell apart.
It completely upends how we usually process the news. I mean, you are taking the ultimate unpredictability of global events and trying to run it through this really rigorous, almost algorithmic filter.
Exactly.
It basically treats reality less like a series of accidents and more like a compiled program just executing code.
And that is exactly the framework we are exploring in today's deep dive. We're looking at a highly systematic forecast for the upcoming week of May 11th to May 17th, 2026.
Which is coming right up.
Right. This was published today, May 9th, by Astrology, and it was written by Gaia Harashu. And I have to say, looking through this source material, this is not your typical, back of the newspaper vague horoscope.
No, not at all.
Nobody is telling you that you'll meet a tall, dark stranger or to watch your wallet. It's like trying to read the source code of the universe.
Yeah, the language here is entirely different. The author is using a really specific methodology that assigns mathematical coefficients, like literal numerical values, to everything.
Yeah, everything.
Yeah. Planets get scores, days of the week get scores, zodiac signs get scores, and then the text uses all these interacting numbers to predict the movements of world leaders, the fluctuations of Bitcoin, and even the specific day's fault lines might shift in the Earth's crust.
Which is wild. But before we get into the actual predictions for next week, which are honestly intense, we really need to talk about how this math actually works.
Let's do it.
Because the author draws this very strict philosophical line in their system between what they call natal planets and astrological houses.
Yeah, and that division is really the engine under the hood of this whole framework. According to the text, your natal planets, meaning, where the planets were located at the exact moment you were born, they symbolize your own personal internal behaviors.
Okay, so like who you are deep down.
Exactly. They dictate your innate character and how you naturally want to act. But the astrological houses represent the external possibilities. They represent the actual circumstances that happen to you.
So if I'm trying to visualize this coefficient system, it almost sounds kind of like how stats work in a role-playing video game.
Oh, yeah, that's a good comparison.
Right. Your natal planets are your character's baseline stats, like your base strength or agility. That's just who you are. But then you walk into a new environment and the weather is terrible or there's a toxic cloud and suddenly you get a -2 debuff to your stats.
The debuff, yeah.
That's the transiting planets and the houses altering your baseline, right?
That is a fantastic way to look at it. The author calculates these daily coefficients by adding and subtracting the values of transiting planets, like the ones moving through the sky right now, from your natal base score.
Making it a literal math equation.
Exactly. The resulting number predicts how your inherent character is going to react to external circumstances on any given day. So if the math results in a high positive coefficient, you navigate the day with flow and success.
And if it's a negative coefficient,
then you face friction. Lots of it.
okay, I follow the logic for a human being, but here is where the text really made me pause.
Oh, I know where you're going with this.
Right. Because I am familiar with mundane astrology,
Mm.
the branch that looks at world events. And I know astrologers will often use the incorporation date of a company to pull a chart.
Sure, it's pretty standard.
But this author takes it a massive step further. They apply this biological, birth-based framework to decentralized, non-human entities. They give a literal birth chart to Bitcoin, to the euro, to the Turkish stock index, the BIST 100. How exactly does this text justify treating a decentralized peak of code, like Bitcoin, as a living organism with a sun sign? I mean, how does the universe know when crypto is born?
Well, it requires a big shift in how you define birth. In this specific framework, astrology isn't restricted to just biological life. It is the practice of mapping the energy of a specific moment of inception.
Okay.
So the premise is that the exact second a collective human intention is given a structural vessel, that vessel inherits the cosmic weather of that precise moment.
Meaning, like, the very moment Satoshi Nakamoto mined the Genesis block.
Yes, exactly. The text tracks Bitcoin based on a birth date of January 3rd, 2009. And because of the planetary alignments on that specific day, The text argues Bitcoin has a Sun and Mars ruled by Saturn in Capricorn,
Wow.
and a Venus in Pisces ruled by Neptune. The euro gets a chart based on January 1st, 2002. The bias T100 gets April 5th, 2013.
It's just so hyper-specific.
It is. But the logic here is that financial markets are inherently volatile because they're driven by human emotion, right? Mostly fear, greed, and panic.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So by assigning a birth chart to an asset, the author is attempting to find predictable mathematical patterns in all that collective human volatility.
Okay, so once we accept the premise that everything you, me, Bitcoin, the euro has a baseline mathematical code, we can start tracking the incoming weather that's going to hit that code next week.
Right. And looking at this forecast, the weather report for the middle of the week is brutal.
It really is, specifically Wednesday, May 13th.
Yeah, the author explicitly flags May 13th as the week's lowest coefficient day. It is basically the absolute danger zone of the entire forecast.
The text lists this whole cascade of warnings for the 13th, like bad weather, severe earthquakes on weak fault lines, and very specifically, transport accidents.
Yeah, the transport part is key.
They link this travel chaos to the signs of Gemini and Sagittarius, which rule communication and travel. The text actually warns there could be major logistical obstacles and even plane crashes.
Which is heavy.
Very heavy. But the real driver of all this negative math on the 13th and also the 15th and 16th is Saturn.
Right. Saturn is the anchor for all of this friction. The text calculates that Saturn is sitting at a -2 coefficient on those days.
And Saturn is kind of a big deal in astrology, right?
Oh, massive.
Oh.
In astrological symbolism, Saturn is the ultimate taskmaster. It represents structure, limitation, and authority figures. The author specifically lists parents, bosses, and pretty much anyone in a position to give orders.
You know, a -2 Saturn sounds like a strict micromanager boss who just showed up to your office on a Wednesday morning in a terrible mood.
That is painfully accurate.
He hasn't had his coffee, his personal coefficient is completely drained, and he has decided to sit at your desk and audit your expense reports from 3 years ago just to block every project you try to get off the ground.
And the worst part is, that micromanager isn't auditing everyone's desk equally.
Oh, right.
This negative energy is targeted. The author notes that people with strong natal placements, specifically a Sun or Mars in Aries, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, Libra, Sagittarius, Capricorn, or Aquarius, are directly in the crosshairs.
That is a lot of people.
It is. If you fall into those categories, that -2 coefficient is going to manifest as severe restrictions and sudden obstacles from those authority figures.
So if this micromanager boss energy can restrict an individual just sitting in a cubicle, what happens when that desk is the Oval Office?
That is where it gets really interesting.
Because the text doesn't stop at personal office politics at all. It takes this mathematical Saturn transit and applies it directly to international geopolitics and world leaders.
The synthesis of the methodology here is incredibly intricate. I mean, the author strips away traditional political science entirely. They aren't looking at trade deficits or military strategy.
Right.
They basically treat international relations as if they were interpersonal conflicts between coworkers. They map these astrological transits directly onto specific heads of state to explain why diplomacy might fail.
And as a quick reminder to you listening, we are purely unpacking the mathematical framework and the specific astrological claims the author is making in this text.
Yes, definitely.
We are just looking at the mechanics of the predictions. We are absolutely not endorsing any political outcomes here. But the mechanics are hyper-specific.
Very much so.
For instance, the text notes that U.S. President Donald Trump is a Gemini. Because Saturn is mathematically punishing Geminis on May 13th, 15th, and 16th, the author predicts he could face significant mishaps on a planned trip to China, potentially forcing a delay.
And it goes even deeper by layering in relational compatibility. The text advises that Trump, who is operating with a very low coefficient as a Gemini during this window, needs to stay far, far away from Capricorn figures who also have low coefficients.
When it names names.
It does.
The author points out that North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and Saudi King Salman are both Capricorns operating in close geopolitical proximity to Trump.
Yeah.
The explicit suggestion is that Kim Jong-un, acting as a vessel for that restrictive Saturn energy, might specifically ruin Trump's relations with China during this trip.
I mean, think about the underlying assumption of that prediction.
It's wild.
It posits that a bilateral trade discussion or a massive geopolitical summit could derail not because of conflicting economic policies, but because a Gemini and a Capricorn are mathematically incompatible under a -2 Saturn transit.
It's viewing global diplomacy through the exact same lens you might use to assess a bad blind date.
Exactly. And the roster of leaders flagged for this Saturn transit is extensive. You got Elon Musk, who is a Cancer, Ukrainian President Zelensky, an Aquarius, and Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, a Libra.
All on the hit list.
Yeah. The text places all of them in Saturn's restrictive path for the week. It paints this picture of global leaders not as the architects of history, but basically as puppets acting out the math of the planetary coefficients.
Which naturally leads to the next big conceptual leap the author makes. If a -2 coefficient can delay a presidential flight or ruin a diplomatic summit, what happens when it interacts with the physical planet?
Right.
Can mathematical formulas crack a tectonic plate?
According to this text, absolutely yes. The author claims these coefficients directly manipulate the Earth's crust and the global financial markets.
Let's look at the earthquakes first, because the methodology here is fascinating to me. They don't just point to a fault line.
No, they don't.
They sum up the coefficients of the sign of Scorpio.
Right, because the rationale the text provides is that Scorpio fundamentally rules the underground. So by tracking the mathematical value of Scorpio, the author believes they are tracking the pent-up volatility beneath the Earth's surface.
And they identify two major intersection points for severe quakes next week, May 10th and May 13th.
Yep, the 13th again.
And they arrive at this using an astrocartography map. This isn't just looking up at the sky, it's literally mapping planetary orbits onto the globe. They're looking for specific geographic lines where negative energy from the Sun, Moon, Mercury, Mars, and Uranus crosses over lines connected to Venus, Pluto, Mercury, and Neptune.
And the geographic net they cast with those intersecting lines is massive.
It really is.
The text warns that these negative earthquake-prone lines pass through regions in Turkey, specifically naming Malatya, Adıyaman, Kahramanmaraş, and Şanlıurfa.
Okay.
But the lines also extend through Saudi Arabia, Syria, the USA, China, Russia, Ukraine, and several others.
It's a huge swath of the globe. And alongside these geological warnings, the text pivots to a massive astrological shift predicted for the very end of the week.
Yeah, Sunday.
Right. We spent all this time talking about the middle of the week being dragged down by a -2 Saturn. But on Sunday, May 17th, Pluto enters the picture with a coefficient of +5.
A +5 is an enormous statistical outlier compared to the rest of the numbers in this forecast. And Pluto's symbolism is vastly different from Saturn's.
How so?
Well, where Saturn restricts and audits, Pluto represents deep, often violent transformation. It is the energy of upheaval, destruction, and subsequent rebirth.
Okay, so a totally different vibe. And the text specifically warns that people with low coefficients in Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius need to be on a high alert for this Pluto shift.
Yeah.
It even singles out Taurus and structurally associates the nation of Israel with the sign of Taurus, warning of negative transformations and potential protests on this exact day, May 17th.
And that intense Pluto energy on the 17th is also the exact mathematical catalyst the author uses to predict the financial markets.
Yeah.
And honestly, the economic predictions in this text are arguably the most granular numbers they offer.
It is a complete roller coaster. The text predicts gold dips on May 13th when Saturn is heavy, but rises on the 17th under Pluto. Bitcoin drops on the 14th, but rises on the 17th.
Right.
Silver and the Turkish BST 100 index see their bumps earlier on the 12th. But the prediction that really made me do a double take was Brent crude oil.
Oh, yeah. The oil prediction is the climax of the financial forecast.
The text tracks the oil coefficient hovering around the teens all week. Then, on May 17th, it calculates that Brent crude oil hits a staggering coefficient of 39.
At 39.
A 39. The author uses this specific formula to predict a massive price surge. But I have to stop and push back on the methodology here.
Okay, let's hear it.
Let's look at the sheer breadth of what this text is predicting for one single week. A Turkish earthquake, a mishap on a presidential trip to China, transport accidents, a dip in Bitcoin, and a massive, numerically specific spike in crude oil.
It's a lot.
Isn't this just a case of casting such an incredibly wide net that something is bound to happen that looks like a successful prediction? If you predict chaos everywhere, you're never entirely wrong, right?
Well, from a purely statistical or scientific standpoint, your critique is absolutely valid. The more variables you predict across a global scale, the higher the probability of a coincidental hit.
Exactly.
But if we analyze the psychological function of a text like this, casting a wide net isn't a flaw in the system. It is the entire point of the system.
What do you mean?
Well, we live in a world of constant information overload. The daily news cycle is chaotic, it's fractured, and it's deeply anxiety-inducing because it feels so random.
So you're saying the math provides an illusion of control.
It provides a profound sense of order. When a text gives an exact, calculated mathematical value, like a 39 to an oil spike, or maps a political protest to a +5 Pluto transit, it tells the reader that the chaos isn't actually chaotic.
Planned.
Right, it's just a formula running its course. There's enormous psychological comfort in believing that an earthquake or a sudden market crash wasn't a random tragedy, but an event scheduled on a cosmic calendar that could be calculated in advance.
That makes a lot of sense. It takes the terrifying randomness of life and puts a neat, predictable little number right next to it.
Exactly.
Which perfectly explains the final section of the text. Because after making these massive, sweeping global predictions about tectonic plates and world leaders, the author brings the math all the way down to a deeply personal level for the reader.
They navigate from the macro systems back down to the micro experience. If Pluto's shifting the oil markets, well, what does that mean for you trying to get through your work week?
Exactly, and the text offers a general outlook based on those astrological houses we discussed earlier. They state that for the week of May 11th, houses falling in the signs of Leo and Aquarius will have the lowest coefficients, meaning you can expect struggle and restriction in those areas of your life.
But houses falling in Virgo and Pisces will have the highest coefficients.
Right.
Meaning success and a state of flow.
And to make that actionable, the author provides a really detailed breakdown of exactly where that dangerous May 13th Saturn transit, our micromanager boss, is going to hit you.
But to understand this part, the listener needs to know their rising sign, not just their sun sign.
Right, so for anyone who doesn't have their birth chart memorized, your rising sign, or your ascendant, is the specific zodiac sign that was ascending on the eastern horizon at the exact minute you were born.
Yes.
In this astrological framework, your rising sign acts as the anchor point. It dictates the order of your 12 astrological houses, which represent different areas of your life, like your career, relationships, or health.
And because your rising sign sets the architecture of your chart, it determines exactly which room of your life Saturn is walking into on May 13th.
So you better look it up and prepare for Wednesday the 13th. The text gives a rapid-fire list of warnings, and it is highly specific. Let's look deeply at a couple of these.
Okay.
If you are an Aries rising, the text says Saturn is hitting your first house. The first house rules your core identity and physical self. So on Wednesday the 13th, you aren't just facing generic bad luck. That micromanager boss is attacking your sense of self and your personal projects.
Ouch. But if you are a Taurus rising, the architecture shifts. Saturn is moving through your 12th house.
And what does that mean?
Well, the 12th house rules the subconscious, isolation, and hidden matters. So for a Taurus rising, the restriction might not be a public failure, but a private anxiety, or dealing with hidden enemies working against you behind the scenes.
Creepy. And the list continues through the whole zodiac. Gemini rising, Saturn is in your 11th house, so watch out for drama in your friend groups or networks. It goes all the way down to Pisces, who has to watch their second house, which rules personal finances and values. So whatever your rising sign is, the text is giving you a highly specific architectural blueprint of exactly where to expect friction.
It's basically telling you which door to lock when the Saturn transit hits.
It gives the reader a checklist. If you know where the friction is coming from, you can prepare for it, which again reinforces that psychological comfort we were talking about.
Absolutely.
So bringing all of this together, what have we actually unpacked today? We have explored a highly structured, intensely mathematical framework for astrology. It's a system that treats the universe like a predictable algorithm.
Yeah, that's the core of it.
For the week starting May 11th, it predicts a deeply turbulent environment centered on a restrictive -2 Saturn transit on May 13th. The author claims this will create transport disasters and geopolitical friction between world leaders.
And that friction is immediately followed by a massive +5 Pluto transit on May 17th. The text uses this specific mathematical spike to predict major transformations, potential societal upheaval, and incredibly precise financial market shifts. Most notably, that huge jump in the coefficient for Brent crude oil up to 39.
We also looked at the mechanics of how the system operates, specifically how it assigns biological birth charts to things like the euro or Bitcoin, attempting to map the emotional, volatile swings of global finance onto the rigid, predictable orbits of the planets.
Whether you find this methodology entirely unscientific or you see value in the mathematical structures it proposes, Analyzing this text is a really fascinating exercise.
It really is.
It provides a clear window into how millions of people around the world process, organize, and anticipate global events. It is a deeply human attempt to make sense of the senseless.
It reveals our profound, deeply rooted need for structure. We are desperate for the universe to have rules that we can learn, calculate, and apply.
We just want the chaos to be a code we can crack.
Which leaves us with one final thought for you to mull over. The human brain is, at its absolute core, a pattern recognition machine. We evolved to look at the stars and predict the seasons so we could survive.
Yeah.
Today, we're looking at the immense, overwhelming complexities of a globalized economy, rapidly shifting weather patterns, and terrifying international political clashes.
It's a lot to process.
So is our desire to map all of that modern complexity onto the predictable mathematical orbits of the planets just an ancient evolutionary coping mechanism for the sheer unpredictability of being alive? And if so, if we really are just looking for a cosmic spreadsheet to soothe our anxieties, does the math make it any less comforting?